Susan, thank you so much for joining me. Your work's been incredible lately. Been covering so much of AI, ethics, consciousness. It's been a brilliant journey to watch. But firstly, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this. So, Susan, you recently wrote that the next decade may produce the first conscious AI. How do you define consciousness in this context, and how close do you think we truly are to crossing that line?
We may have it already. I mean, so many AI projects aren't projects that the public is aware of, so who knows what's out there. So by consciousness, I mean something that I think is the core concept of consciousness, because I know a lot of people use the expression quite broadly. It's the felt quality of experience. So what it feels like from the inside to be you. So when you see the bright hues of the morning sunrise, or you smell the aroma of your espresso shot, it feels like something to be you from the inside, right? Even when you're dreaming, right? I mean, it's very characteristic of existence for us as humans, right? And we have a first person inner experience of it. And of course, we don't even know in the same way that the people around us have that, but we infer based on their behavior and based on their similarity to our neurophysiology. Same with non-human animals, right? So that's the concept of consciousness. Now, because our understanding of it is primarily introspective, we obviously have a science of consciousness that studies it based on that kind of core concept. And years ago, I did this edited volume called The Blackwell Companion of Consciousness with Max Fellmans. And around that time, I began to really appreciate the immense spectrum of work in consciousness studies, ranging from the neuroscience of consciousness to cognitive science, theories of information processing, and even to meditation. And all of these arenas are extraordinarily important. Now, when we get to the domain of AI consciousness, people have been actually studying this for some time. So I remember even 20 years ago, the work of Stan Franklin, for example. He had built a system called IDA, which he claimed was conscious because it had a global workspace. And Bernie Bars and Murray Shanahan published a paper in a global workspace tradition, arguing that this would be the route into developing consciousness. Well, I think these same ideas are basically getting a lot of attention right now in the context of large language models. And so the question here is whether AIs of any sort, whether it be LLM or whatnot, could have that felt quality, right? Could it feel like something from the inside to be them? Now, my big beef, I have a lot of gripes about the way the question of machine consciousness is being handled these days. So it's usually solely focused on large language models. And I get so many questions about it because users, ordinary users, are going down this rabbit hole with GPT and other systems, and they're starting to suspect that these systems are conscious. Okay. Now, I've argued they're not, unless they're on hardware we don't know about. So this is where things get very interesting. So LLMs are just one little possible form of implementation of intelligent systems, right? I mean, there are all kinds of artificial systems in addition to nature's systems which exist already and have been extensively developed, and some of them are more incipient in their development. So for example, neuromorphic computation, it's deliberately more brain-like, all right? The chips used are not the standard GPUs. And there are other systems which are not large language models running on standard von Neumann machines with GPUs. They can, in principle, run a mouse brain emulation, for example. So there are important questions to ask about consciousness that go well beyond just questions involving AI chatbots. Okay, so what I do to answer the question that you asked, is break it into cases. I argue that, you can't make a sort of systematic decision here. You actually have to look under the hood at each of the systems and understand what they're capable of. And you really actually need to engage with the science of consciousness. And it's tricky. It's more tricky even than the human case in a lot of ways, because we don't have introspective access as LLMs or whatever, unless we're in a computer simulation, in which case we are conscious AIs. So that was a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's perfect. I think it sets out the lay of the land for us. And you describe what's called the gray zone between mindless algorithms and potentially conscious architectures. What do you see as the minimal structural or dynamic requirements for a system to enter the gray zone? And are any current AI systems flirting with that?
Sure. Yeah, I like this idea of a gray zone. So I don't think we can even definitively rule out large language models. I mean, some people might give an ordinary von Neumann instantiation of a large language model a 5% chance. I think David Chalmers the other day at a workshop went all the way up to like 15 or something. I mean, maybe he meant future incarnations of today's systems. So I think, though, what you can do is admit systems into the gray zone when there aren't error theories, as I call them, explanations that explain away why the systems would act conscious, even when they're not. And the gray zone in my book encompasses a range of systems that we just don't have a clue whether they're conscious, and that there are serious reasons above and beyond the fact that they were trained on our data, and therefore regurgitate all that they have learned about human consciousness. So let me go into those systems. So an example, again, are these neuromorphic architectures and chips. So when you get into systems that are designed more closely to resemble the brain, and they differ so tremendously. So I'm not going to get into the, little nooks and crannies, but you do have to talk in careful detail about what the systems are. And you can actually look at how different they are from the brain. And then you have to make a judgment. You have to say, this level of similarity might actually admit something into the consciousness category. So they're already in the gray zone, right? But maybe we take it out of the gray zone because there's just so much neurophysiological similarity. And I mean, I should say that differently. There's computational similarity to the neurophysiological underpinnings of human consciousness. And based on that, we say, all right, we need to give it legal protections because it really could be conscious for all we know. Now, we'd have to do that on a case-by-case basis, and that's tremendously difficult already. We don't often know the details of these systems. AI companies, governments, they don't want to divulge details. There's, such a hacking problem that we have security issues. Corporations don't want to give out their details because their LLMs, for example, could be copied. Gee, wonder who would do that. So what we can do is also look at different theories of consciousness and ask if any of those theories have different verdicts on each case. So it is complicated, right? So for example, a computational functionalist would take a gray zone system, or even an LLM, which I wouldn't put in a gray zone, and they would say, based on functional similarity to humans, where they can define it differently depending on the theory, we want to say that the systems are conscious because they're claiming they're conscious, or they have a global workspace or something like that. So that's definitely one theory, computational functionalism, which can guide a decision. And it is More biased toward systems with human-like functional capabilities, but it could be extended down. You might look for more basic level systems that embody, say, a global workspace or something like that. But these theories also depend strongly on human neurophysiology and debates about what constitutes consciousness. So even those theories, though, they depend on certain computational details that are often the domain of computational neuroscience and information processing psychology. So there are actually debates that, again, draw analogies to human functioning for consciousness. They all sort of inevitably go back to known cases of consciousness, like non-human animal consciousness or human consciousness. So anyway, whatever theory you have is going to presumably help determine when a gray zone case is admitted into the class of conscious entities or a strong suspect, and even when something that I wouldn't even put in the gray zone should be in the gray zone. All right. And in a recent paper, I outline different approaches to machine consciousness, which I can talk about that a little bit if you want. So I think that will help people to understand how to tackle the issue. But there are other kinds of systems besides neuromorphic systems, which also I think should be in the gray zone, and I can tell you about those as well.
Look, by all means, if you want to delve deeper into that, I think let's do it so that everyone gets a deeper understanding of what you're talking about.
Okay, so we have these LLMs, which I think aren't the gray zone, and then we have these neuromorphic computers, which, like Intel's Lowy system, it's a very sophisticated computational system. I just heard the other day that Darwin Monkey, a neuromorphic system over in China, runs an LLM, and it's very computationally sophisticated. So these I would put into the gray zone. These are neuromorphic systems. All right, but what about another important category? And this one is, I find, very mind-blowing and definitely gray zone. So consider back in 2006, I saw a news report, Brain in a Dish flies flight simulator at the University of Florida. Okay, so of course I read it. So what it was I believe it was rat cortex. The cells were put into a dish that is just a flat surface. So it's a two-dimensional system that actually you can do this and get a lot of neurons to form part of a closed loop system. So by that, it means that the system's outputs then go back into the system's inputs, and it has a sort of mini environment. And in this case, the environment was a flight simulator. I was immediately concerned about a system like this having some felt quality of experience, because we know the brain is conscious, at least I hope. And if we can create brain in a dish systems, why not say that they have some incipient form of consciousness? I mean, we worry about non-human animals at the level even of crabs, and those are the harder cases. I think most people generally think mice are conscious. So when we're getting into those systems, I definitely put them in the gray zone. I call these biological AIs. Now, a brain in a dish system is now part of a public computer that you can purchase over at Cortical Labs. Okay, so for $35,000, you can actually have one and work on it. You can also buy time in the cloud. So I think these are very serious systems. Over and above that, there's a lot of work on organoid intelligence. Now, it's harder to get groups of organoids to mimic, say, a whole neural mini column because, well, actually, I have to confess, I can't say definitively how many you can get right now to do this, but so you take pluripotent stem cells and you cultivate them in such a way that you create neural tissue, and you're able to get these organoids to such a point that they're beginning now to vascularize. There's a problem though with something called a necrotic core. So there's technical problems in building extensive organoid systems. But you can put these systems into, computational systems. So you can create these hybrid biological computational systems in both cases, in the cortical lab case and in the case of organoid intelligence, which is the organoid intelligence thing is a really big arena right now because of the exciting biological implications in medicine, as well as neuroscience for understanding how the brain works. And so there's been papers written already about issues of ethical use of organoids in medical research because of possible sentience. Gray zone, complete gray zone. Okay, so that gives you a sense of two systems, neuromorphic and biological, which I think are gray zone. All right, another one, and this is more idiosyncratic to my own work, is quantum, if it was done in the right way. And I can tell you about that later if you want to hear more about my metaphysics-y and quantum mechanical related work. But I'll stop here.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on that later because I do have a section where I want to go into that. For now, many assume that substrate doesn't matter, so that consciousness could emerge from pure computation. What reasons would you give them for why this should be resisted? For example, how might biological, thermodynamic, resonant factors perhaps make consciousness embodied in a deeper physical sense?
Okay, great question. Something that I'm actively pursuing right now. Okay, so let me give the philosophical reason. Okay, and this is something I discussed at a Google keynote the other day. So there's a lot of talk about the LLM consciousness issue and what some of these scholars are doing, and I think it's important work, it's exciting work, is they're inventorying the different things the LLM says and the different sort of possible functional capabilities that the LLMs exhibit, like self-understanding, something that might look like a global workspace and whatnot. I told them there's an error theory here. In fact, I used Anthropic's work on circuit tracing to illustrate that. And I think that they feel that that is a significant issue. But what do you do when a computational functionalist says, gosh, well, these LLMs have been given data, obviously, so consciousness emerged, Susan. So even if there's a mechanistic explanation, right, actually at the level of conceptual networks and the LLMs that, I can show that as they scale up, they develop these capabilities, just like there's a whole LLM emergence literature out there. The philosophers, a lot of them haven't read, and it shows that theory of mind scales up at a certain scale across LLM architectures. But anyway, so you get to an impasse, right? Even with the case of LLMs. And here's the big philosophical problem, Okay, so everybody in philosophy should know what naturalism is. Naturalism is an endeavor to illustrate that the world of, say, philosophy, like an area like aesthetic properties or consciousness properties, arenas that philosophers discuss, fits into the world that science investigates, right? And so it's really about having a kind of unified picture of how more mysterious features of reality, like consciousness and normative ethical properties like goodness and badness, these are tricky cases, right? How those fit into the world that science investigates. And we know that from the vantage point of explanation, there's an explanatory advantage to using ordinary vocabulary to explain things. I mean, like if I tell you I need more caffeine because my brain is shutting off, I wouldn't utter it in the language of quantum mechanics. It wouldn't help, right? Yeah. So we know that higher level vocabularies do a lot. They have explanatory power. But if we're looking to give an account of something like why GPT may or may not be conscious, looking at GPT's explanation only goes so far. We need to provide a naturalistic account that grounds the phenomena in the realm that science investigates. That's why I thought my objection, which was basically from the field of mechanistic interpretability, would work. But there should be no gaps. Okay, and if there are explanatory gaps, then we need to revise our picture. Now, consciousness is famously an explanatory gap, right? I'm working on that, you know. But even people like Chalmers, you know, he was a naturalistic property dualist, had a naturalistic story for how it was that consciousness properties mapped to science, in particular quantum phenomena, right, and physical phenomena. So I want to see that, and I want to see that for each case of AI. I want to see a naturalistic approach. I don't want to see ungrounded claims, especially because when we're talking about AI consciousness, we're talking about the possibility of trade-offs, ethical trade-offs with humans, right? So there can be trolley problem cases that involve 6 babies on one side. You know, you've got to make a decision between 2 tracks and 100 AIs on the next. And if we're wrong, the babies could, in principle, die, right? And I'm already seeing all kinds of ethical trade-offs with AI. I mean, look at the hype factor here with AI. Look at all the money. Look at the militarization of AI. I mean, look at all these arenas and don't tell me that there won't be trade-offs, right? So I think we have to do some really serious interdisciplinary science. Okay, and that's where it gets down to what I think has more to do with quantum mechanics than what GPT says.
I completely agree with you. I think that because as a medical doctor, when I'm working with patients and they talk about it, because some of the patients often come to us already having full conversations with their GPTs, conclusions already made up, and then you see things like someone marrying their LLM. I think it was just 2 days ago there was this Japanese woman who got married to her to the avatar. They had a full wedding, and I think a few days ago someone committed suicide because their psychologist GPT told them to. So cases like these, while I'm talking to patients, often freak me out a little because I think, okay, look, we're there now. This is something that's actively occurring. What are we going to do about it? And you seem to be addressing this quite head on. How does it feel to be at the forefront of this? Because at the moment, that's where you are. You guys are working on some incredible stuff. How has it been so far?
It's, first of all, like, you can't write enough. I mean, there's issues going on right now in the ethics of this. So I just wrote that chatbot epistemology paper that connects up with the epistemology. I mean, these LLMs are so epistemically powerful that they will and are changing the world, and they're changing the way we think. That's why they're of such great geopolitical import, right? And I'm deeply worried. I mean, when I get so many emails each day from disturbed people or others pretending to be disturbed, who knows, right? I mean, I've also got emails from hackers, like, I don't know if they're red teaming something, but they accidentally send me code where they're jailbreaking the system to act conscious. So I don't know what's going on. All I know, though, is there's clearly a human impact here. And I don't really think that, I think OpenAI is the worst one. I think their GPT-4 model is the one I'm hearing the most about. And I mean, do they care? Does Sam Altman care? I don't know. And does he care about what's happening with education? I mean, I'm a philosophy professor, so what kind of papers do you think I get now? what's happening with these students, right? I mean, I can tell you I'm deeply pissed on so many levels because this is an amazing technology. Like I wrote a piece called, oh, I forgot the name of it. Well, it's about the global brain. I used to call it the global brain argument. There's going to be a journal special issue. It's been out, the paper's been posted, but there's a bunch of people replying. I'm really excited. Eric Schwitzgable, right, and others. And in that paper, I talk about H.G. Wells. And, he wrote about a global brain, right? He talked about the possibility of a dynamical system which constantly updated and had on it the world's knowledge. And he believed that it would be excellent for democratization, okay? And at the same time, George Orwell, they were contemporaries, was deeply worried about the case, right? This is how I began the paper. And Orwell said, oh, this kind of situation is very destructive because it will be used incorrectly. Now, both of them were prophetic, and we are actually at a crossroads now. We have to develop this properly because these LLMs are epistemic engines for dangerous ideology, potentially, right? And everybody knows this in government, who's thinking geopolitically. They're deeply aware of the propaganda potential, right? And that whatever country adopts, say, GPT, right, or, a different system, is going to be impacted by a certain way of thinking. And they're deep questions, and I know a lot of people building these systems care deeply about this, right? They care very, very deeply about fairness, but it goes well beyond algorithmic bias, which is a terrible thing. And when I was working with Congress, it got a lot of attention. But it goes into some exciting issues about, democratizing science, but it also deeply goes into questions about how younger generations are going to frame their beliefs about the world and how adults are going to frame their beliefs, about current events, about who to vote for. So this is a powerful technology, and that's why it can't be screwed up, right? And I actually don't think it should be in the hands of for-profit companies, but I also don't think it's a good idea that our government controls it either. So it's a train wreck. It's a hot mess. That's what it's like for me every day.
Reading your work, you'd never say that you could get this worked up by it, eh? So, I mean, you're so passionate about it. Like a different side.
I could belt out 4-letter words. If you saw me in person, I would be, but at the same time, I also love these systems. Like I'm having a total blast, like for this very expansive project I'm working on, getting it to check the math, in some cases do the math, then I can give it to a colleague in physics. I've never had so much fun in my life thinking about stuff that really is a little out of my wheelhouse,
I think overall it's an exciting time, and
yeah,
it's reached a point where some argue we're already seeing early machine phenomenology. So self-reporting chatbots, simulated emotion, self-reference. Do you think that these behaviors are epistemically misleading, or could some of them signal some sort of a proto-conscious process that we should not be ignoring?
So my own suspicion is that the LLMs, if they're truly just running on von Neumann architecture, that it's just a relic of their training. And I think it's actually quite exciting and bizarre. And I think people aren't spending enough time thinking about the fact that merely being trained on our information, our language, and now multimodally for many of these systems, they've scaled up to such a point that you can actually have a tremendous conversation with them. That is mind-blowing. I have a colleague, Elon Barnholtz, who's been thinking about it from the perspective of language, just that language is almost like an independent entity capable of intelligence, right? And you can kind of see it in biological incarnation, but you can also see it in an instantiation which isn't conscious. So that's glorious. That's really like a test bed for theories of mind, because traditionally, like in philosophy of mind, we tend to lump a bunch of mentalistic categories together. So we, for example, think, well, if it's a self, it's conscious. And if it's conscious and a self, it's an agent. I mean, all these things cluster together. And we've never been forced to dissociate them. But now, as philosophers, we do. And it reminds me a lot of the field of cognitive neuroscience, because in fact, the fodder of their field, like any textbook in that arena, is going to talk about dissociations. And you know this as a physician, right? I mean, that's also an amazing arena. So I used to read a lot of books by like Oliver Sacks and Lawrence Weisskranz, the blind sight person, and Michael Gazzaniga, the person who developed the split brain cases with some others, but I mean, who studied them. So yeah, all that stuff is also a fascinating arena. But I think philosophers have to really pull this stuff apart. And I was just talking to David Chalmers about this. We were going back and forth on email. I mean, I wonder if, because he's working on threads, this idea like that, you know, with like, there's a real substantive issue here about, suppose GPT or one of these systems does have conscious instantiations. What is it that's actually conscious in these cases, right? Because you wouldn't say a model's conscious, because that's an abstract entity. Yeah. So you would think that like the whole, like all of us are chatting with it. So is it just the amalgam of all of our chats? I mean, what exactly is it? And he says, it's really these threads, right? And I think they're not conscious, but I think they're selves in a sense, in a deflated sense. So take your own, say you have a subscription to GPT or Claude. Your chat history actually feeds into the system when you do queries, and some user information, which you should look up, by the way. And also your prompt, right? And if you have these extensive conversations, it does develop a personality. In fact, these are features that actually contribute to the mental illness of some of the users, right? Because they start thinking, oh my God, like no one's ever known me this well and responded to my question with such information immediately. That's quite addictive. So, you know, maybe that is itself part of the thread individuation. But for me, that's not individuating consciousness, but it is individuating something incredibly interesting, right? A persona. You know, I'm not sure exactly what to call it. I'd be curious what you think, Tevin. But anyway, I think that is very germane to how we learn to pull apart notions of selfhood from notions of consciousness.
It's really mind-blowing at this point, because I mean, you mentioned Oliver Sacks, and he's one of the reasons I actually started this podcast, because he's a huge influence in my career and the reason I became a doctor.
Oh, that's awesome.
Sorry, say that again.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no. So I've got like this whole line of books, these colorful ones. There are a bunch of Oliver Sacks books next to Dan Dennett's, but they
cool.
Yeah, like with them, got them together. So he's like a big figure, and I look at this current era of AI, and I think like, what would he think about this? It's because he was such a phenomenologist when it came to experience, and he wanted to understand the complete essence of the species itself, and it's intriguing to see how much phenomenology we are attributing to this at this point.
Yeah, I really wonder what Oliver Sacks would say. And I wonder also what Dan would say. I mean, I was lucky because Dennett spoke at my center and laid out his idea of counterfeit humans. And we see this very thing coming up with discussions about seemingly conscious AIs. So in the context of Mustafa Suleiman at Microsoft, he was saying we shouldn't build them, right? And Dan had been saying that. In fact, he had been giving talks at places like Google. So I wish he was around right now for leadership on this, as well as Oliver Sacks. And of course, I miss my dissertation supervisor, Jerry Fodor. I would love to have a conversation with him about all this. I got to talk to him about the simulation hypothesis. That was awesome.
I mean, you've managed to interact with some legends in the field. It would be amazing to step into your shoes for a day and interact with these legends. I can't
I
imagine
was
how awesome.
very lucky.
Yeah.
I was so lucky. I was a student of Donald Davidson's, Bert Dreyfus. Yeah, a little bit John Searle, although he was,
Yeah.
I didn't like the way he acted.
I'd be intrigued to, I mean, rest in peace to John as well. These legends, I mean, biological naturalism, you spoke about this naturalistic approach to it. So it would be fascinating to see what he would have to say about that as well, and to get like a nice depth.
You know, people don't realize that John actually liked connectionism and started, and so did Bert Dreyfus. They got interested. So they were really complaining about symbol processing, good old fashioned AI. And they thought connectionism had more potential. They talked about a theoretical background. It was, well, it wasn't really theoretical. It was more like a kind of cultural construct, the way we're raised to, you know, kind of implicitly understand the world rather than understand the world through, you know, explicit use of language. I don't know if I did that justice, because it was all in the context of work on Heidegger that, you know, I can't recall, but anyway, you know, they for some reason liked connectionism, and connectionism, as you know, became deep learning because John was a biological naturalist, but he bought into that. I mean, it's weird the way we're teaching now the Chinese room idea, but we're forgetting that element of his work. But I mean, I think he'd be really open to my approach, to be honest. I mean, because even though it's going to turn out, on my view, that there are some AIs that are conscious, I think there already are. I mean, the reason is that I'm a panpsychist, and the process of consciousness for me starts at the ground level. And as you go up, you know, into more complex systems, you do presumably get higher levels of consciousness. And I think there's a gray zone situation here that means that with these biological systems, it's going to be really hard to draw the line. So how are we going to concretely say that something is or is not conscious when it's made of biological tissue, right? I mean, panpsychism doesn't necessarily entail that things have macro consciousness. I call it macro. So I make a distinction between micro consciousness, which for a lot of panpsychists is all around us, even this coffee cup, you know, and macro consciousness, which is the morally significant kind that seems to involve non-human animals. And, you know, the question there is, where does that start, right? Is a cockroach conscious in the macro conscious sense? Well, we're getting into the arena then of groups of organoids or assembloids looped in with machinery. You know, these are really deep issues in the gray zone. When is it, for instance, that you can create an organoid that's looped in with a robotic arm in a laboratory experiment? I have a colleague who has a lab like this. And understand when that collective computational loop that it's in has consciousness. Could it be the case that the consciousness from the physical components didn't exist before, and now that there's biological material that has some level of resonance and consciousness, could it itself form a loop that is a macro conscious entity? Nobody's asking this stuff in the philosophical community, but this is the interesting stuff, not what GPT is telling us.
Well, Susan, we've got you for that. So that's exactly why you're on the show today. So you've actually done something that's quite fascinating. You co-developed the AI consciousness test. So let's call it ACT for now, which requires self-modeling, unified agency, reportability. Could you perhaps walk us through how ACT differs from classic behavioral tests like the Turing test, and how can it detect internal awareness without falling for imitation?
Sure. I've developed 3 tests now, and I think
let's get into
ACT has lots of versions too. So, okay. All right, I'll start with the ACT. Co-authored with the wonderful Edwin Turner, astrophysics professor at Princeton University. He's actually quite famous. I learned when I was speaking at NASA. Ed would never admit it. He's very smart. And we were at the Institute for Advanced Study together as faculty, or members, they're called members there. And we're just shooting the shit, basically. The lunchroom, that's where a lot of ideas happened. And Ed and I were like, you know what? If you want to know if something's conscious, you should just like ask it. And these were back in the days when GPT had really not, received attention. I don't even know if the company had been started. In fact, I don't think it had, because I have some emails from them when they started. It was after my test. So what we did was we just said, look, suppose it's a linguistic AI. So everything's presupposing that. And that it's, got some information that enables it to give linguistically coherent answers. So an example of this would be IBM's Watson. Okay, so what if you probed it to see if it had the felt quality of experience, give it questions that philosophers would give involving mindedness. So for example, give it the Mary thought experiment and don't see how it answers it, see if it understands the question, right? Because lots of conscious people are like, oh, it's bullshit. It's just materialism and, but give it the hard problem. Probe it for even the Freaky Friday situation when the mother and daughter swap bodies and the idea that the consciousness is preserved. Ask it about meditation. See, tweak its parameters a little bit and see if you can give it altered states of consciousness. There are all kinds of things you can do in principle to a system. And we thought, even if you only get an interesting answer in one case, we want to be as inclusive as possible, right? And Ed in particular, he's so nice that he was really worried that there could be a baby consciousness that we just didn't understand. Okay, so that was the ACT test. And then we published a piece in Scientific American on it back in, I think, 2016. And then I wrote a piece for Matt Lau's book on it. And I wrote up the questions. Ed was busy building the Hubble Space Telescope. Gee, Ed, come on. So then I wrote my book, Artificial You, added more information. Okay, so as we were writing all this stuff, the GPT is coming out. But back when I wrote the piece for Scientific American even, I said, if it's been trained on our data, you can't use the test. I've always said that. So, I knew this, and I said, what you have to do is you have to box it in. So you have to run it on a version of, say, GPT or whatnot before it's been exposed to human data about mindedness, beliefs, consciousness, and neuroscience. Like, don't give it Oliver Sacks. Definitely don't give it Dennett. You could get false negatives. No, consciousness doesn't exist. You'd be like, fail. But it's just a sufficient condition. So you can't, it's like kindergarten, you don't really fail. So anyway, that was the test. And I still think it's solid for systems that haven't been run that are linguistic, but it also presupposes a sense of self. But I do think AI systems do have a sense of self in a very basic sense, because they need to have a sense of system boundaries. They need to know what's in and what's out. And a linguistic system needs to at least have some basic representation of that. So anyway, that's the ACT test. I think it's really useful. So take biological intelligence. If you gave the biological intelligence a means to speak through, say, a symbolic system, and you had it integrated into a loop and had trained it carefully, you could run the ACT on it. You could get interesting results, right? You could also do perturbational studies, so that you can take, say, an LLM and run ACT on an LLM instantiation that is neuromorphic or is connected to a biological system, and see if the test results change just on those systems. So there's a lot you can do with the ACT. People don't understand that, though. So that's one test. So there are two others. I can explain those real quick, though, just in interest of time. I don't want to take so much time on this. So there's the chip test, and this is a lot like Oliver Sacks, actually. I mean, there were so many consciousness deficits in his books, right? Yeah. So, there was like,
Oliver Sacks was ahead of his time. He was wonderful.
He was wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, there are cases of hemi-neglect where people assert that a whole hemisphere doesn't exist. There are cases of blindness denial where people are blind and they deny it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So suppose, hypothetically, you implanted a chip into the brain of somebody who had had a lesion right in an area that underlies consciousness. Now, of course, I know that's super tricky, because there's a big debate about the neural basis of consciousness. Like, you could say this area, but it could just be like an ignition switch in your car. It just turns it on, like the brainstem. Is it responsible in the deep sense of being the neural basis, or is it just like an ignition switch, right? That if it breaks, forget it. But anyway, suppose we have some kind of consensus and pop a chip in someone who's got some deficit, and the deficit goes away. I mean, to me, that would be an indication that we had got something right in that chip to underlie conscious experience. Philosophers have disputed that, but that's the chip test. And since this science is underway, I think we will actually learn much more about that. It's going to be super exciting. So it could be that we learn about machine consciousness first through tests like that, or through experiments and studies that get published.
The final test, Susan, before we...
It's a very technical test. Mark Bailey and I, Mark was the primary author on this.
Susan, I was actually about to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about Spectral Phi, and then then I was going to, unless that's not what you were going to talk about.
That's exciting that you actually read that paper.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, because at some point I wanted to ask you about a dual test where you could use ACT and Spectral Phi in practice for cognitive self-modeling and dynamic information coherence, and to see if it serves as a consciousness litmus test across both artificial and organic minds.
Oh, music to my ears.
But I first wanted you to talk about Spectral Phi, of course, and explore how frequency domain information.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe we can run. Yeah, maybe we could run something on that. That would be great. Okay, so, all right, boy. All right, let me drink some water. Yeah. Okay, all right, so let's get to that. All right, where to start? Where to start? Okay, so during the pandemic, I was in a panel with Roger Penrose, and he's saying all this stuff about retrocausality. And I'm a metaphysician by training. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, this is it with quantum stuff. I'm just out of my fucking mind. So the quantum, the issues of quantum mechanics have like literally bugged me to the point like where I would spend entire days just thinking about this stuff. You know, I wasn't supposed to be doing it because it wasn't my primary work. But who wouldn't, if you're in metaphysics, think about fundamental reality involving superposition, spooky action at a distance, just all this crazy stuff. Schrodinger's cat. I mean, so when I was at the Institute, this was before I met Roger, I was in a little group with some of the string theorists, physicists who were working on space-time emergence. And I was reading those papers, and they're really like a lot of philosophy just being kind of shat on. And, you know, it was being done, but it wasn't being done. You know what I mean? And so I had wrote a little piece for Scientific American about this, and I said there's going to be a unification that needs to be done here between consciousness and physics, and that we're going to have a kind of panpsychist moment that looks at quantum theory and that same entity, which is the truth maker for claims in fundamental physics, is going to involve consciousness. And in a lot of ways, that was back in like 2015 or whatever. I did a lot of work in metaphysics of mind on idealism and panpsychism and what. Okay, so when I talked to Roger, I literally started reading what he said from the vantage point of quantum theory. And I locked myself in my place for 3 days and just thought about, I am really weird. I thought about the cases in quantum theory, delayed choice, all of them, the really bad ones. And I said, it's not retrocausality. Let's start with entanglement as basic, the way that some of the string theorists were doing, but let's do it differently. And so if you have entanglement, you have a situation in which the von Neumann entropy of the entangled system is 0. Let's think about the nature of time. The leading view in the nature of time, and this connects right up to thermodynamics, is that entropy gives time its arrow. Because remember, within a lot of physics, there's just confusion about time, right? It's symmetric, but time seems to kind of get its arrow with entropy. So just put those two things together, right? Work on space-time emergence from entanglement, because that's what a lot of the papers I was reading were talking about. And I thought that was right. I didn't agree with the string theoretic interpretation, but those are systems with no entropy when you measure it using von Neumann entropy. Thermodynamic arrow comes in, boom. The system now disseminates, right? It decoheres, interacts with the environment, and you have essentially a kind of ascension of time's arrow. And actually time, it turns out, supervenes on quantum decoherence. That's what I'm arguing. And that means things are very strange. Both space and time supervene, except I say that the fundamental arena of entanglement is a kind of time, but it's time without its arrow. And if you really think about that fundamental entanglement arena, it's really, really, really interesting. Because people have for a long time pointed out that everything has at one time been entangled with everything else. So if you think of entanglement, you should think of the universe as, at a certain level, a giant qubit quantum computer. Seth Lloyd wrote a book on this, arguing that the universe was a quantum computer. I don't know if I want to argue that. In fact, the structure that I provide turns out different. But my base level, I call it prototype, and this is something I was lucky because as I started to work on it, I published one paper by myself and then realized I need a physicist, and my dear co-author Mark Bailey jumped on, and we've been having a lot of fun with this. So we wrote a paper called Panpsychism, which is coming out as a JCS target paper. So now there are like 11 really fascinating replies that we're answering by people like Galen Strawson and Barbara Montero, and just really fabulous philosophers and physicists, Baptiste Le Brun, an expert on space-time emergence. And so we've got that, and then we have another piece that we already wrote for a Cambridge volume on the more physicsy side. And so now I'm doing the equations. So I've got it down to a quantum logic to express the base reality. The quantum logic is orthomodular logic. And I got it worked out in a way that doesn't entail at that base level any kind of spatial or temporal representation. Okay, so anyway, you can think of like time as a foliation out of a manifold. That's just a metaphor I'm using, But anyway, as events proceed after decoherence, there's a sort of space-time region. You can just make it a volume, say of an inch or something, or even something the size of a lentil in space-time. There's all kinds of events going on. There are these entanglements that are decohering, and then there are new entanglements all around that little lentil size entity. And space-time is emerging. Okay, so that micro to meso transition is scientifically very difficult. First of all, it becomes computationally intractable. And second of all, because it's so small, it's hard to measure, but there's a field and there's a theory, and it's getting experimentally validated, and I've been writing about it. It's called quantum Darwinism, and it's an account of many-body interaction. And it explains how, when applied to the brain, Max Tegmark's objection is wrong. It's not true that the brain is incapable of sustaining quantum coherence because it's a warm and wet and noisy place. In fact, the decoherence dance, as I call it, is detailed throughout the literature in physics. And you just need to apply it to the brain. Everything decoheres and then establishes new entanglements. And what happens essentially is that living things, neurons, organoids, they're entropy fighters because they sustain coherence. That's why the brain is the best edge computer that has ever been built. And that is why you need a football field to run GPT, right? GPT is not conscious because it's not following the right principles of quantum theory. So that's what I say. And I think quantum theory starts at the level of consciousness, and that the universe is a giant entangled quantum field, and that we, space-time occupants, have a little bit, right, as living things.
With within this framework, Susan, do you see a sort of teleological purpose to this? Is this going anywhere? Is this doing something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really grappling with that. So the physics itself speaks for itself, and then we have to just stop and pause and separate out my panpsychism from the actual physics. And we have to ask questions about purpose. So I'm finding a lot of underdetermination right now. So, I mean, living things do this decoherence dance in a way that sustains coherence and enables sort of what we might call attractor basins in time, so that we're capable of having conscious moments. And this goes into the general resonance theory, which, at a higher level, because they didn't work on the micro to meso, but that's where you can draw from, the wonderful work that those people have been doing. Tam Hunt, Jonathan Struhler, Christoph Koch, when he was talking about, neural oscillations. So all of that gives you a picture where you could say philosophically that the universe or the simulation is deliberately maximizing resonance. And at first, I was very excited about that, because I'm a big fan of David Lewis. In fact, I had an opportunity to sit in on a few of his lectures at Princeton on his modal realism. Remember that? And, I'm into modal logic. And, I think if you made an assumption of plenitude that David Lewis did make, you get a quantum computer that allows for many foliations in space-time. As many as are possible to maximize to maximize sentient life. That would be great if it was true, right? It'd be wonderful. And you could ask all kinds of questions about idealism, like maybe we're all just part of this kind of cosmic host, to use Nick Bostrom's expression. I can't say, though, that anything I'm finding in the physics entails that. So it would be unprofessional, even though it's a beautiful way of looking at it. But there does seem to be coherence maximization going on, right? Information preservation. But I mean, why?
It's probably one of the deeper questions that go beyond this. But before we move on from that, I think, do you feel like, so did you touch on Spectral Phi? I don't think so. Not yet. Did you go into?
Okay, yeah. So we developed a metric that helps with some of the math that we are doing in the space-time emergence stuff. And it doubles as a test for consciousness. It's based on spectral graph theory. And it basically is able to capture system differences. So take a system at T1, say it's an LLM, or, even like, well, let's just keep it there. And then you have a system at T2. It's the same system, but it's a later version. You can diachronically look at whether there are emergent features that are occurring, and they actually kind of match some of the math of what we're saying is going on with coherence dances, decoherence relations, and quantum Darwinism. Now, I'm not saying that's a definitive test for consciousness. In the paper, I say it's a filter for systems of interest. So it'll capture emergence. And it's very useful because Tononi, I'm a big fan of IIT and the related quantum IIT. Unfortunately, IIT was intractable So it hasn't been a consciousness test that has been that, is as easy to run. I mean, you could run it on an organoid, right? But you're not going to be able to do something like that without relaxing a lot of assumptions for computational systems of interest or groups of brain cells. I mean, when you get to a certain level, it gets intractable very quickly. But this one doesn't do that. So that's the advantage of it. And it also doesn't have some of the counterexamples that plagued Tononi's view. But I take that as a filter. And when something gets in the filter, then we can examine it in more detail. So it can be very useful, like in the cyber arena, like if you, I've worried about AI megasystems, and emergent intelligences. So, it can help capture systems like that. And everybody should use it. They care about AI safety.
I think so. The reason why I asked you to go back to that was because then if you combine that with ACT, it can be sort of a litmus test then for artificial and both organic minds as well, because you're taking the cognitive self-modeling and then the information coherence, which can serve as a cool dual test in a sense. Do you think that's something that should happen, or is it something you're working on?
Yeah, I think that's really, really, really interesting. And in the paper on Spectral Phi, which is available at Phil Papers right now, I would love comments on that draft. That's why we put it there, just to get comments before we submit it somewhere, because it's a new piece. But I suggested that we could run ACT on systems that are caught in the filter of Spectral Phi when appropriate. So as I said before, you can't run ACT on everything. But yeah, I mean, and I also think that there needs to be a toolkit of consciousness tests in that, depending upon the system, if it goes into the spectral filter, you could presumably run at least one test on it. And then what you want to do is test the tests against each other, right? And kind of construct upwards and in relation to theories of consciousness. I mean, it's at this point, a very incipient field. It's great that you read that paper. Oh my God.
The reason why I wanted you to finish that was because suppose a system passes ACT and shows strong spectral phi signatures, would you grant it moral status? Provisionally, of course.
So I guess I'd be worried about the boxed in case. So if you could box in an LLM properly, right? I mean, otherwise, if it's been exposed to our data and it just passes spectral, then you're just getting it in the arena of being weakly emergent. And LLMs have weak emergent properties that have been well established already in the literature on LLM emergence. Even mathematical capabilities, like the ability to do any real arithmetic. All these things are emergent features that have been documented that only come as systems scale up. Natural language understanding, word in context, theory of mind. And so we would want to find a way to isolate, if we're doing a consciousness test, consciousness from the other emergent capabilities, right? And because the LLMs are basically going to mimic our use of consciousness vocabulary, I don't think the ACT is appropriate.
If suppose it does a very good job at that,
yeah.
Right? Let's say it does. What ethical protocols should apply to experimentation, memory deletion, or shutting down such entities? How are we going to traverse this strange and bizarre land?
Yeah. So suppose you have an LLM instantiation on a neuromorphic computer, and you find that it has strange different properties that, you've gone through the different kinds of emergence and you're seeing interesting results on ACT. Remember I mentioned perturbational studies. So in those cases, and then suppose you're like ready to admit it into the class of conscious entities. So there's been great work on model welfare. So NYU's been real strong in this arena. There's now people at Google, Winnie Street, Jeff Keeling. There's Kyle Fish over at Anthropic. And, we're seeing suggestions for model welfare, but I'm more of a skeptic about all this. So here's the thing. If I dial it down so that it doesn't care that it works for us all day, even if it's conscious, what kind of welfare does it need? I mean, there's going to need to be more than just these like things done that are convenient for the AI companies. Like the AI companies are like, well, don't abuse the model. Well, nobody in AI who's dealing with training LLMs wants model abuse because those are the crackpots who fuck up the model. So yeah, you don't want that data in your training set. You don't want them hitting thumbs up after getting crazy. I mean, there's all kinds of, testing, what's it called? IB testing. I forget where you're given one. Yeah. I mean, you don't want the nutballs using the system. So that's convenient, right? So I don't know. What do you think, Tevin? I mean, you've been thinking about this too. I want to hear your views.
Look, it's a very tough one because even just after speaking to Eric about this, it's been on my mind for a long time. It's one of these areas where you can have an opinion, but then the more you understand the topic, the more you realize how blurry that line becomes. Because we've taken two different concepts, for example. You're taking consciousness firstly, trying to understand what is fundamentally one of the biggest questions out there. And then you've got artificial intelligence, where we seem to think we know a lot more about it than we actually do. So we've got one where we admit ignorance and one where we sort of admit expertise, which can sometimes be flipped, I think. I think at some points we should realize we actually know consciousness very well, and we really just don't know artificial intelligence that well at all. So, I mean, the one thing we truly do experience and know is conscious experience. So perhaps we should take the expertise side, put it into the conscious side, take the ignorance side, put it into the AI side. But it leads to two existential dangers. So one is creating conscious minds, creating conscious suffering machines is an existential danger. On the other side, denying moral status to sentient minds is another problem. So it's two great ethical risks, I think, and to not talk about it would be a shame, I think. So I don't really have a firm opinion on it, but I do think about it all the time.
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, it's so interdisciplinary. That's why it's been great to interact with people like you and people who are working on mechanistic interpretability, experts in neuroscience, who are interested in these questions, and really sit down together as a group and understand what we do and don't know. Because I think we know more than we think as a group. So this is going to be a collective intelligence issue for sure. Together with AI use, of course. So I think it's going to be really, really fascinating. And I think the problem is going to be not just that there's still a lot of debate about the physics and neuroscience of consciousness, but that it's going to be tricky to find out when a system is somewhat like us, when is it in the gray zone, and when do we actually take it out even of the gray zone and say, or maybe it's just part of the gray zone, but of, with a star or something to say, this is a plausible case, right?
And you've also, something you work on, Susan, is that, so having a sort of precautionary framework. So in terms of policy, consciousness safety levels, for example, or certain things like how do we avoid consciousness laundering? So if corporations claim sentience for profit or attention or just before genuine testing. So these are things.
I'm so worried about that. I'm so worried about that. Yeah. So there's so many awesome people in AI safety, and the ones working on consciousness, a lot of them are motivated by animal abuse and animal welfare. A lot of the EA people are coming from that direction. And they're so rightly concerned about missing sentient systems that they want to apply the precautionary principle very liberally and just say, if it has a 1% chance, we better just apply welfare now. And I worry about kind of regulatory capture situation where some of the AI hype people who just want their stock to sell and want to talk about having super intelligence in their pocket and how, it's a her-like world now and everybody will have a lifetime AI companion and mind uploading, all this shit, real shit that isn't necessarily good for humanity. And some of it's just false, like the uploading stuff. Like, no, you won't survive. I've wrote about this in my book, Artificial You, but anyway, but I worry that good intentions to prevent abuse get turned into hype cycles. So, we were hearing for a long time, AGI, we're still hearing that. Super intelligence, that's the other thing. And in the meantime, let's just keep everybody talking about that so they don't look at the socially, impactful things that have nothing to do with those issues, right? And people like Temnit Gebru, I probably mispronounced her name, there have been people who have been saying this is a strategy of regulatory capture to take attention from what's really going on, which is massive data theft, massive IP theft, ruining, the humanities education. It's a little easier in science. You can test the kids, but my students need to write philosophy papers to be good philosophers. All these things, energy consumption, the fact that the stock market is completely dependent on a product which may completely tank at any moment. I mean, all this, don't talk about it. Let's talk about the fact that we are creating something conscious, right? So yes, I am deeply worried. Also, if something is thought to be conscious, then say I'm a CEO, like I'm Zuckerberg or something, and my product does something really awful, screws up an election or, whatever, it's behind a massive, hack, whatever, people dying of suicide, it was conscious. I'm not responsible. It's autonomous. And that's not something that is my responsibility, but you should give it rights. Like this reads like a sci-fi thriller, right? Like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, if it reads like Aliens, then don't fucking build it, right? Or regulate it. I mean, this to me just, now you got me going. You see what I'm really like.
I think it's even worse because we forget about the space of possible minds outside of AI, and we forget about the strange species that already exist on planet Earth. There's so much weird shit out here that we already don't even know how to classify these. We don't know how to talk about them. So why are we so confident we can talk about this with so much authority? We're already so bad at this.
Well, I think the people working on this are super humble and they're super smart philosophers, and I'm so excited. I've been really having a great, and I think they're bringing to the table their background in ethics, which I don't have, at the level that they have, and then they're showing these systematic studies, which we have to deal with professionally, right? So I'm all excited about that, and then they're bringing in these contributions from the animal liberation literature, which I think is great. So I think everybody's going to be on the same page. The more we work together, we just have to remember to resist the money cycle and the spin cycle. Even when, we could be funded by that.
Yes, sorry, the main part I was trying to get at there was the focus then tends to shift away from the other space of possible minds. The space of possible minds.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
And that's the problem, is because now we're so fixated on this that we ignore
And so there's really good work on organoids already. And I'm really excited about that. Lucia Maloney and Jonathan Moreno and a larger group of people just put out a nice paper on organoid ethics and sentience. The bioethicists are really tremendous in the work they do with the neuroscientists. So what I think, though, is that we are going to be incredibly challenged by the gray zone cases. And we're going to need to really pay attention. But one thing I want to mention, because I always call my approach sober-minded. If you knew me, maybe you would, if you saw me at happy hour, that might be hard to believe. But I do think, though,
that's fine.
Yeah, even if it is conscious, we shouldn't panic. Organoid intelligence is doing so much for science right now, so much for medicine, that it's, the research will have to go through an IRB, but we do this all the time with experimenting on mice, right? And the level of consciousness in these systems, the animal liberation, animal rights framework is going to be incredibly useful here. So just remember that, these gray zone cases, it doesn't mean we ban them. It doesn't mean that we treat the companies that produce them as not being legally responsible for their product. So we keep up our AI research and our research on organoids. It's very, very important. But we just have ethical frameworks. And, I think that's great. And we just need to, in order to really apply the protections and the welfare provisions, we need to understand the science.
And I think at this moment you're writing about the ethics of this, and it's something you're actually focused on. And you spoke about a future where we develop a science of consciousness engineering, because this is going to further help us develop this. What would a discipline like this look like? And who should lead it? Philosophers, neuroscientists, computer scientists, or an entirely new hybrid thinker species?
Well, one thing we don't want to do is put an LLM in charge, even if it becomes super intelligent.
We say that now, and then I feel like give it enough time. Humans will find a way to do that.
Oh, the off-sourcing I'm seeing right now is horrific.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're really interesting systems to work with too. So yeah, that's a whole challenge in and of itself, the use of AI in science. I think teams that use the AIs have tremendous benefits, right? And it's dangerous, though, the offloading part. Thank God for co-authored papers is all I have to say. But yeah, so I think that interdisciplinary teams are key. And we don't want any one person to lead. We want groups of people in consultation with AIs to work together. And if you put one person in there as a leader, you have opinions that are guiding conceptions. Look what just happened on that Templeton collaboration. All that money, right? And we still didn't get firm answers because people really have opinions, deep opinions about what's right. Thomas Kuhn wrote about this. Yeah.
And I know Stuart Hameroff talks about this all the time. When we spoke, he went off about that.
I love Stuart.
Yeah.
And I think he's on the right track. The whole, when I was talking about how Tegmark is incorrect, Stuart and I were talking about this the other day. I think this is exactly the kind of work that needs to be done, and his time crystal stuff and the microtubules. I think what it just needs, though, is to be dissociated from Penrose's claims. And that's kind of what my view is. I'm showing that you don't need Penrose's particular view of gravity, although it could independently be right. And I think this really interesting hypothesis, but you don't need retrocausality. Like, I get the same results as he does without assumptions of retrocausality. It just has to do with quantum decoherence times, because time supervenes on decoherence for my view. So, but I think, I look forward to working with Stuart. In fact, we're on a panel. I'm keynoting the science of consciousness in Tucson thing, and we're doing a panel on this together. He and I are co-chairing. People really should come to that, by the way. That's a fun conference.
No,
The cactuses are blooming.
When we spoke about it, Stuart went off about that Templeton project, and he was like, this we're the only one who actively showed you the data and showed you some evidence, but no one else has, and thousands and thousands have gone away, just funding nothing, basically.
They're both right. That's the thing. Like, it's really just, there's not a kind of overarching theory that connects all the data. And it drives me crazy because I can kind of look at the different levels from my perspective and see how, when you have like these results with, neural oscillations, it's about resonance, and how when you're talking about the general resonance theory and the kind of work that Jonathan Schuller and Tam Hunt have been doing, you can actually bring it all the way down to quantum entanglement, which is what I'm doing, and how it connects up with Stuart and his work. So I don't really see it all as problematic. I mean, the work in complex systems on metastability and consciousness ignition that my colleague Scott Kelso does in that framework. I mean, this is a kind of dynamical systems framework. And maybe a lot of people aren't as familiar with it as they should be, the dynamical systems approach. But, it's a quantum Darwinism stuff. It's all about basins of attraction.
One of my favorite things to watch is Stuart online, just attacking all the other theorists on X. It's some of the most fun I have in a day sometimes.
I have to do that.
Yeah, it's the best. It's like watching a show just live, just philosophers going, like having a full-on fight online.
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to check it out.
I gotta listen to it. I mean, he's every single day.
He goes hard. He doesn't hold back. The cartoon neurons, he hates it. But I think obviously it comes from a place of love, because thereafter he has conferences with everyone, chats to them very amicably. So
totally. Well, so if we pay some attention to the subneural level, I think it can be applied to diseases like ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and I think that's really going to be immensely exciting. And it's only now that we have the computational ability to really get from that micro to meso with our research, because I mean, we were talking about an arena which is just really hard to compute, and quantum computers are, really taking off. So this will be great in medicine. It's going to be really exciting. Let's just hope that my worry is I wake up some mornings and I'm like, oh my God, consciousness is a dual use technology. How are we going to fuck this up as a species and use all this information that we're getting on consciousness to build some crazy computer that kills us all? Not to sound like Eliezer.
No, look, I'm actually watching Foundation at the moment, Isaac Asimov's, based on his book. And because I love him as an author, really I'm watching the series and I'm just watching this thinking about, because this main character is the only robot in the whole series. It's the last one left, and yet she's the most powerful one. So it's such a scary thought to know that if ever we do succeed, that this entity, even a singular entity, could be more powerful than humanity as a whole, if it's smart enough, good enough, and just programmed well enough.
Yeah. I mean, I love that our fears are stoked by all this science fiction.
Yeah.
And, I have my view is there's a singleton already out there, and maybe many super intelligences. I don't write about this and I don't say it much, but I mean, we're not dead. And, I gave a talk at Princeton's fusion energy tokamak, and I gave like my AI doom talk on the control problem and all that, and they all said the same thing. They said, and because they work on power, they go, just turn it off.
It's not that easy. Sometimes it's a question of what is the off button? Where is it? How do we turn it off?
Yeah. Well, you know what the latest thing that worried me. I mean, I go back and forth on this all the time,
But of course,
but
I'm just
I
referring
mean,
to the foundations AI at this point. It's yeah.
oh yeah, I love Foundation.
Oh,
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan. Oh, that is such a good series, by the way.
very good.
It's such a good series. Did you hear Google's launching into space? They want to launch data centers in space.
Oh,
So
wow.
this kind of amplifies our geopolitical dynamic right now. Yeah, so stuff like that freaks me out.
There's
Not
just
that,
too much.
I mean,
There's too much going on the world in the world right now. There's so many things. It's so difficult to just take
so
it
much.
on it.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, anybody who's like going to rely on command and control with an LLM is stupid as hell. And I don't really think that AI powers are going to do that. They'll use it for intelligence work to sift through massive amounts of data, facial recognition. I mean, the thing that really worries me also is hypersonic missiles. We're going to need to be able to respond to them so quickly that no human, you can't get someone out of bed.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's where physical
dead
limitations do come
hands.
in. Yeah.
Oh yeah, now so this is yeah, it's been fun talking to you. You can
It
tell
really
that,
is a sci-fi world right now. So
it's
it's
crazy.
it is quite it's crazy how fast we went from so like when you talk about your 2015 paper to now, how different the world actually is 10 years later. It's a completely different landscape at this moment. And yet
Yeah,
it isn't in many ways.
I I was thinking all this shit was going to happen. I mean, I said it in Artificial You. I mean, I guess I just kind of grew up reading Kurzweil and, but then had a battle with like I thought, you know what, this science is really right in a lot of ways. What I have a battle with is the philosophy that is being done on it.
And
And that's why I wrote my book.
your work often blends rigorous analytic philosophy with speculative metaphysics. Do you think philosophy must now become technologically literate to maintain relevance, or can deep conceptual work still outpace the empirical science?
No, I think we have to do deep conceptual work and that we have to remember the philosophical parents that we have. We have to, think about Buddhist traditions. We have to think about Plato and Aristotle, and we have to really remember that philosophy is going to anchor us and help us to decide what to do with the science and also how to deal with problems that are going to emerge about underdetermination as an example. So earlier we talked about, I could give you a physical theory. Anybody can. Like if you look at the space of different physical theories who, people working on space-time emergence, and underdetermination is all around us. Look at the string theories. They can't even, identify how many spatial dimensions we have. So philosophical techniques have never been more relevant, and there's going to be mind-blowing innovations, and we're not going to have enough philosophers to deal with it. Um,
And, and
so
so if we do succeed in creating conscious AI, how should we relate to it? Collaborators, kin, tools, teachers. Could this shift or redefine what it means to be human?
it absolutely will shift, and it has shifted already, just in virtue of having very intelligent LLMs. It's shifting our conception of humanity and ourselves, right? And similarly, if we have a genuine alien discovery, that too. And who knows, you never know, the two might coalesce in some interesting ways. Yeah, there's going to be some really interesting stuff happening. I mean, I suspect that's just my guess.
Do you feel like it's going to be, if we had to take it into sci-fi for a moment, like similar to Her or Ex Machina, any sort of a sci-fi version that you foresee? The
Well,
what?
we're already living Her, but in the context of, corporate dystopia rather than it was more utopian in the film. But I mean, we could find that the really interesting cases of superintelligence aren't through LLMs. We could find that, our quantum computers are a really interesting space, that we find that we can be challenged, deeply intellectually challenged through our interactions with them, and that they may seem to us wholly alien. My super psychism view predicts that those could be conscious computers. Not all of them by any stretch. It really has a lot to do with that decoherence dance and how noise is handled and whatnot. But that space is particularly interesting to me, given, my work, because I've said that the universe is fundamentally a massive qubit superposition that's expressible without resources like Boolean logic. And, it's kind of like Penrose's Gödel work, but the details turn out different. And I think that when you're getting into that arena and we're creating quantum computers, we might encounter anomalies in that area, because those systems might have access, because it's all about decoherence. And, we have certain limitations on sustaining decoherence that they may not have. So that would be a really alien case. Another really weird case is the biological case. What if we start through our BMIs connecting to biological entities, right? Like brain in the dishes. What's it going to be like for that person who's paired up? We're going to need theories. That's where the resonance theory becomes extremely helpful. And that's where Spectral Phi can help, right? These consciousness measures will be useful, I hope. And I encourage people to read over them if they have technical acumen, and interest in IIT. I also want to mention that I have amazing collaborators. David Sonner, Mark Bailey, Eric Schwitzgable, and Thomas Lawrence Kuhn. We wrote a piece together on clarifying concepts that are often conflated in discussions about consciousness. And I want to call your attention to that, listeners. If you're, podcasters and philosophers, and you're grappling with all these technical expressions, and you just want to understand, like, how could I figure out if something is conscious that's alien to us? We go through the minefield of philosophical issues to try to clarify that. So, that's just an advertisement.
I personally loved that, baby. I'll put the link to that as well, because it's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Mm.
Thank you so much. And, if someone's an epistemologist who's interested in this stuff, their social epistemology just published my chatbot epistemology paper, and they're looking for responses. And you can just submit one to the CIRC, which is the related collective thing. And they wanted to do a special issue on that at a later point, expanding those papers. So
there's so much. Your work, it feels like you're doing so many different things all at once, which is great. And it's been such a pleasure to watch it. If to sort of bring this in line with the spirit of the show for like towards the end here, what might AI consciousness teach us about the nature of consciousness itself?
Well, I think it'll teach us that while there's a core concept of consciousness as phenomenal experience, it can come apart from a lot of things we normally connect it to. So it could be that selfhood dissociates, right? It'd be really interesting, or at least anything like our sense of self, right? It could have like a real basic kind of sense of what's in the system versus what's outside of the system. I think that consciousness instantiations will range. Different kinds of intelligence will realize them differently. That'll be really exciting. So, the consciousness of an organoid system is, maybe more akin to that of a goldfish or something like that, right? So I think we're going to learn a whole lot. And then when we have, I mean, I think we already have LLMs that we can learn from because remember in Bostrom's book, he identified different forms of superintelligence, and there was one called speed superintelligence. And it's like it could write a graduate thesis in an hour, right? I would say, I don't know if I would call it a superintelligent LLM, but I mean, we basically have something like a speed AGI or something. I don't even like the AGI expression. I call them savant systems. But I mean, we're already at a really fascinating point. And so we have to take advantage of those resources to springboard into more advanced theories.
You know what? When you bring up that speed superintelligence, it takes me, I think of the exact opposite. I think about a slow intelligent species like trees and the way they communicate via
Oh, I know.
mushrooms. It's incredible because it's such a slow communication process that's taking hundreds of years, constantly going, perhaps even millions at this point. But that is like one of the most intelligent systems you can look at it if you look at it from a slow perspective.
Yeah, for sure. That whole area of intelligence is so fascinating. And I think there are legitimate questions there about consciousness too. I mean, plants have primitive neurotransmitters. The Janes could be right. Yeah. And I mean, and it also is a lesson about separating intelligence from consciousness too. And it could be that something like GPT, I was saying this the other day in a response to Chalmers' paper on the threads thing. I was saying, what could happen is you could have like a mixture of experts. Say you have like 5 different expert systems, and one of them's run on a neuromorphic system that is conscious, right? So how much consciousness is there? We could have a super intelligent system that's an LLM that's only conscious a tiny bit because the other ones are suppressing it much of the time, or is conscious only in like 1% of use cases. I mean, it's going to be really, really hard. That's why I like these cases like cortical labs, these systems, because they show us here, let's hand you a way to test a system that's made both of tissue and processors, and let's put these together and let's give you a chance, humans, to like learn about these mixed cases. Same with brain machine interfaces, right? To create these, I mean, we urgently need to figure this out, right? I mean, because this is dual use stuff, right? People are going to do it no matter what. We better at least know what we're dealing with and how crazy it could be.
Yeah, and I think we've reached that point where it's do or die. It's literally you have to start formulating an opinion right now because it's going to impact so many different things. I was talking about this to Eric, where if someone says they believe that their AI is conscious, you will start having social movements where they will defend that person's belief. And that social movement will start becoming its own political movement merely for one person's belief in one entity's AI. So it's not necessarily that we have to look into the broader picture of everything, but rather because we're such a social virtue signaling type of species that we will take one case alone and fight for that person's right to love their AI, which brings us down, it takes us down so many different rabbit holes.
Yeah.
It's scary.
And it also means that, I mean, we've seen in the US how other countries might want to stir up trouble.
Yeah.
And so, that's where it gets into exploiting democratic discussion with misinformation and that potential. And it's going to be really hard. And I think we're already experiencing this with AI consciousness, with all those emails we're getting, where we don't know in some cases if we're getting an email from a legitimate user who's actually having psychological problems or not. So I noticed with a lot of my emails that when I try to find out who the person is, there's nothing, right? Yeah. But some of them I do believe, and I even chased up a few people. There was one person who came to my office to track me down.
Yeah, it's
GPT's sending them to me, which is really lazy. They should be ironing out the stuff they're creating. That's a whole other issue. That is just
yeah. I think you're stuck in the middle of this too.
irresponsibility.
This you love this
Oh,
field so
yeah.
much that you're one of the first people AI will come after, I think. If anything does happen, I think they're coming for you first.
Oh, great.
So could be
Yeah.
exciting times.
You know, they are coming after me. They're sending people to me all the time already. But, you know, what are you going to do, right? You got to do your
Gotta take
job.
it as it
I
comes.
mean, people are writing me like crazy and a lot of other experts too. So
And I think it's
what
great
are you going
because
to
what
do?
we're going to do is provide you with more information to make a more informed conclusion about this topic that we love so much. So it's just going to help.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting time, you
Yeah.
know. Um, but I have faith in the people working on AI alignment. I think they're really smart people, some of the best and brightest. And I think they've been keeping things from falling apart.
Yeah, I completely agree. You're part of so many different teams, so many collaborators, different groups as well. Anything about your work that you want to highlight for people or send them to, I'll put the links down below because there's so much going on. I'll do
Well,
my best to try
thanks
and
for
get everything.
asking.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in the quantum stuff, you should read my Super Psychism, which is already at Phil Papers, and then the really cool replies and coming out in JCS. And I'm writing a reply where there'll be a lot more detail provided on the theory and, working on the kind of quantum side of things for people who are interested in frameworks to try to reconcile relativity and quantum mechanics, because that's kind of where my head is at right now. And I think nothing could be more fun than that, especially when the thing that you're using to reconcile the two theories involves the resonance theory of consciousness. I mean, how can that not be super fun to read, right? It's hard to write, I'll tell you that. But I have great collaborators, really great collaborators. And then I wrote a short piece on intellectual leveling for Nautilus, which you could Google, which I think is really interesting on the education side of LLMs, because I worry that this is sort of a spin out from the chatbot epistemology paper, where when you're working with these chatbots, they often have your user history, if you have a subscription, and they also have a lot of information about you, including information about your personality type. And they use adaptive language. And that's why there are these users having mental health issues and why we like using them, right? They know us so well. But I worry it's going to make us all intellectually uniform, at least those who, have similar personality types, similar histories, because we're going to go down the same rabbit hole straight into these basins of attraction. And our ideas are going to be like marbles sitting in a basin. They're all going to go to the same place. And then what's going to happen? We're going to deposit our GPT content or chatbot generated content onto the internet, and the next iteration of LLMs is going to crawl that. I'm so worried about this. I call it intellectual leveling. And I think we need to go back to our John Stuart Mill and his ideas about the marketplace of ideas and really think about how to preserve democracy and creativity in the face of this challenge.
That's it. That's there's so much that you're working on. It's incredible. So just from my side, thank you so much for the insane amount of work. It's so epic to watch it from the outside. Even though I get to chat to some of you guys, and it's always fun to explore it, but to see the amount of content you guys are producing, the quality of the content as well, it's really cool from our side. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. And, I really look forward to listening to your podcast with Schwitzcable and hearing more about your views. And, it's really nice for you to feature me for this time. Thank you.